Hello everyone, and welcome back to Scum Villain's Self-Saving System. Thank you for joining me. This is not the new setup we had last time. Unfortunately, my microphone died, and I'm using a headset for now, but we will go back to that soon. I'm changing up some things with the stream. Got some new music and hotkey things that hopefully will add a little flair to the story. Let's see here, pulling up our story. So last time, we ended on chapter 22, where our hero Shen Qingchu and his disciples had entered into the tournament, where he knows from having read the book, bad things are going to happen and he's going to be separated from his beloved Benghe. Benghe does not know that this is coming. He is watching from the stands as all of his students enter into this deadly forest to fight demons and monsters, and clearly it'll go very well, I'm sure. Nothing bad will happen, and everything will be just fine. Let me message my grocery shopper real quick. Alright. Hello, Jeff, Nafi, I hope I said that right. Crom, Delvin, Don, Ogre, Lobsel, thank you all for joining us, and without further ado, let us start Chapter 23. After I check this message again. Okay. Chapter 23, Abrupt Change, Part 1. The girl was graceful and elegant, but walked with a slight limp, like she'd sprained her ankle. It was probably an injury she'd sustained while fighting monsters. She said apologetically, "Luo Shishong, I truly apologize. You saved us, and now we're troubling you. If it weren't to protect us, you probably could have gone far ahead already. We're burdening you." Luo Binghe gave a very proper response. "We are all cultivators. Looking after each other is how it should be." Shen Qingchu had long understood Luo Binghe's early stage White Lotus style like the back of his hand, and did not find this strange. He was fighting monsters while also looking after the crowd of weak fighters, women and young disciples, hence he never surged up the rankings. Otherwise, with his ability, defeating Gongyi Zhao would have been effortless. Even Mingfan's ranking was not that bad. But it didn't matter. Luo Benghe would have a second wind. Shen Qingchu absolutely did not reflect on what this agitated attitude of, "My disciple is the most awesome in the world. If he wasn't too good, too kind, and easy to take advantage of, none of you could ever dream of defeating him," meant. Hello, Bold Blue Jay, welcome. Let's see. Yu Qingyuan smiled and said, "Qingchu, this little disciple of yours has great moral character." Shen Qingchu smiled behind his open fan, quietly accepting the compliment. Qi Qingqi humphed and said, "Exactly. It's impossible to tell he was the one who taught him." Other people also said a few words of praise. However, they were not necessarily sincere. What use was good moral character? The Immortal Alliance Conference valued power. In their eyes, the actions of Luo Binghe seemed rather childish. But when the Huanhua Palace Old Master, sitting by Shen Qingchu's side, saw Luo Binghe's face through the crystal mirror, he let out a barely audible, "Huh," and even almost stood up. Shen Qingchu did not glance over, but understood very well. Luo Binghe was beautiful, and looked quite like his birth mother. The old palace master must have seen his face, and thinking he was a junior with a coincidentally similar appearance, became nostalgic about his own favorite disciple. He could scarcely have imagined that Luo Binghe was precisely his beloved disciple's child. On the other side, in Judi Gorge, Luo Binghe was already calmly considering what to do with the crowd of weak disciples. From a moral standpoint, he couldn't just abandon these Huanhua Palace disciples who'd barely started training, but he also didn't want to miss the chance to shine in the Immortal Alliance Conference and win honor for Shizun. Luo Binghe was considering how to extricate himself from the situation, but Shen Qingchu thought he was rolling around with the sisters and setting off sparks. This was the first sister to sleep with Luo Binghe, Qin Wanyu, little Shime Wanyu. The deepest impression Shen Qingqiu had of this sister was that she helped give Luo Binghe a breakthrough, and then later her role was to be a victim in the constant harem intrigue. Only someone as unique as airplane shooting towards the sky could sometimes manage to write the harem of a stallion novel in the flavor of the legend of Zhenhuan. I'd rather read 10,000 words describing how ghost-head spiders mate than read about Sha Hualing tearing at Qin Wanyu. Thank you! Let's see what that book reference is. It's a 2011 television series centered on harem scheming and infighting. Let's see here. So Luo Binghe has met the first person that's going to join his harem in the original book. And clearly Shen Qingqiu thinks that it's going to happen the same way. No, it's not. Watching this parade of people treat Luo Binghe like their personal savior, trailing closely behind him, Shen Qingqiu grew unhappy again. Within these disciples, some truly hadn't acclimated and so couldn't demonstrate their skills and would be fine after a little more time to adjust. But there were also some that were truly ignorant and incompetent, yet refused to back out of the competition and wanted to cling to Luo Binghe's thighs so they could fumble up some beads and ranking. If this was the blackened Luo Binghe, he'd slaughter them all in seconds without even blinking. People take advantage of kindness. Ugh. After walking for a while, every low-level monster using the darkness to attack had been eliminated with pretty much only flicks of Luo Binghe's fingers. His sword never left his sheath, yet he still could not pick up the pace. Why? A female disciple from Huanhua Palace leaned on Qin Wanyu and began to hiccup and cry. "Zhizhi, my feet hurt so much." In front, Luo Binghe stopped, but did not turn around. He lowered his head and rubbed his temples. Nervous, Qin Wanyu lowered her head and spoke quietly to the girl. "Wenrong, endure it for a bit, all right? We have to walk a little faster." Wenrong Mime whined. "But my feet really hurt. I can't walk anymore. We've been walking all day and there's nowhere to take a bath. I'm so uncomfortable." Quite a few untrained disciples in the group agreed one after another. If Shen Qingqiu had the right to decide, he would have long revoked their right to participate and kicked them all out of Judi Gorge. If your feet hurt so easily, don't sign up for the Immortal Alliance conference. And if you do, then whatever, but don't drag others down. Look at Liu Mingyan. The difference is more than a bit. No wonder that she's the #1 female protagonist. But there was nothing he could do about Qin Wanrong. After all, the beautiful sisters Qin Wanyu and Qin Wanrong were members of Luo Binghe's harem, and according to universal convention, no matter how hard they dug their graves, they would not die. Shen Qingqiu's heart filled with a strange feeling of annoyance. "Luo Binghe, in the future, when you're gathering your harem, can you consider quality a little? Don't just accept any decent-looking girl into your arms. Look at how uneven your harem's quality is. This master's heart hurts for you." Qin Wanyu sent another look at Luo Binghe's back and said quietly, "Little sister, we've already made a lot of trouble for Luo Shishong." She still wanted to rely on Luo Binghe and stake herself in the Immortal Alliance conference, earn some reputation. If her sister foolishly annoyed Luo Binghe, it would be bad for her. Qin Wanrong said innocently, "Luo Shishong is such a good person. He won't mind. Isn't that right, Luo Shishong?" Luo Binghe finally turned around, a faint smile on his face, peerlessly handsome, utterly flawless, and did not speak. But for some reason, Qin Wanyu inwardly shivered in fear. But Qin Wanrong had cotton for brains and took his smile as acquiescence. With a la-la-la and a gust-like of wind, she swept over to a nearby creek. "It's coming!" Shen Qingqiu's gaze tensed. Luo Binghe started. Connecting her actions with what she'd just said, he thought she was going to bathe. Fortunately, the little girl wasn't that much of an eccentric and only took off her shoes and socks to dip her feet in the creek. These were the river's upper reaches. What if someone went downstream to drink? Shen Qingqiu silently lit a candle for those disciples downstream. After she took the lead, many of the surrounding disciples followed her example, and the crowd of people actually started to laugh and play just like that. Seeing this, Luo Binghe was completely helpless. It was awkward to approach them, so he could only say from far away, "Waiting in the water at night isn't safe. It's best if everyone comes back right away." Shen Qingqiu felt this was a bit odd. In the original novel, surely Luo Binghe hadn't stood this far away. He shouldn't have remembered wrong. At the time, Luo Binghe, out of worry, or Great Master airplane shooting towards the skies, selfish desire to write fan service, had gone to the creek with the others, and then he'd enjoyed the alluring show of all the women slowly rolling up their stockings. Textbook foot fetish material. Luo Binghe pleaded with them, but a few of them had crossed to the other side, chatting and laughing. "It's all right. Luo Shishong, you come too." Even the sect leaders watching through the crystal mirrors were speechless. Shen Qingqiu had no expression on his face. "Luo Binghe, you still won't go? If you don't, you'll miss the plot." Qin Wanyu knew her little sister was being rather inappropriate and cautiously apologized to Luo Binghe. "Luo Shishong, I apologize. This is the first time Shimei and the others are participating in the conference." Truly lovable and pitiful, she bit her lip like she was making a very painful decision and said, "If Luo Shishong feels burdened, leave us and go. It is all right." These words, together with the expression that was on the verge of tears, were too insincere. After hearing this, any man with a bare minimum of virtue wouldn't have the face to do as suggested. Sorry, I'm having groceries delivered and... oh, they don't have stuff. Sure, that works. Why not? I'll try it. Am I playing a game later? I think I'll probably play a game tomorrow and do a longer reading today. I'm behind on a lot of things and I want to try and finish them, so I think I'll just do it that way. Let's see, where was I? Before Luo Binghe could reply, a sudden ear-piercing shriek came from the creek. Let's try... His face suddenly changed, and throwing down Qin Wanyu, whose beautiful face had lost all color, he stole towards the creek's banks. The audience in front of the crystal mirrors also stood in terror. Luo Binghe held his sword before him and said in a forceful voice, "What's going on?" Originally, 5 or 6 disciples had been washing their feet and playing in the creek, but 2 of them had disappeared, one of them being Qin Wanrong. Frustrated and disappointed, Shen Qingqiu thought, "You see? Told you you should have gone earlier. Wonderful. A perfectly good wife is gone now, just like that. You can't complete the Qin sisters bouquet for the future 3P grand show anymore. Now what?" Despite everything, he'd never thought that during this instance, Qin Wanrong, who was part of the protagonist's harem, could actually get herself killed. A disciple screamed, "I don't know what happened! The water suddenly turned black, and Shiji and the others were swept under by something." Luo Binghe rapidly went to drag the stupid 5 people still inside the creek up onto the bank, but just as he reached out to grab the last person, they fell over like they'd lost their footing, the water closing over their head, disappearing with their eyes open before everyone's gazes. At the same time, a black smog billowed through the creek. Shen Qingqiu looked closely through the crystal mirror. It was actually countless black strands, smooth and silky like a woman's dark hair. From between the strands seeped scarlet blood, diluted by the creek water. They were thicker and more disgusting than Sadako's hair. Someone cried out in shock, "Nu Yan-chan!" In Judi Gorge, Luo Binghe had also quickly identified the monster in the creek. He sent sword glares into the water and cried, "Get far away from the water! It's the demon realm's Nu Yan-chan!" The billows and billows of the hair-like demonic creature swirled within the water for a while. Suddenly, like they were burping after a full meal, the black strands spat out a few things with a stream of bubbles. 3 bodies had already been sucked clean of flesh and blood, leaving only drenched corpses of skin and bone. The pores on the dead bodies were abnormally large, and that was because there were many strands of hair still attached to the skin, thrust into the pores, hungrily sucking out the body's flesh, blood, and spiritual essence. Leaving no pore uninvaded, diving into any opening they could find. This was one of the Nu Yan-chan's most terrifying characteristics. The scene scared the disciples by the creek witless, wails and screams filling the forest, all throwing themselves to hide behind Luo Binghe. Upon seeing the horrible state of her sister's body, Qin Wanyu nearly fainted. Luckily, she was smart enough not to faint for real. Otherwise, with this sort of chaotic situation, who would bother trying to help her escape? Dun dun dun. Chapter 24, Abrupt Change, Part 2. Nu Yanshan was an amphibious creature. After sucking 3 people dry underwater, it was itching to climb the bank and search for new targets. Luo Binghei's expression was icily severe. He snapped his fingers, igniting a burst of flame at his fingertips, then boosting them with spiritual energy, flicked them towards the lurking demonic beast. As soon as they touched the hair-like strands, the flames surged into an inferno, forcing the black mass of hair to speedily retreat into the water, afraid to come onto the bank. He'd executed the entire set of actions in a single smooth sequence, full of formidable might, utterly relentless. Shen Qingqiu internally held up a sign. Luo Binghei, 10 points! Luo Binghei picked up the night pearl that Qin Wanyu had dropped in her panic and raised it high. It looked like a shining beacon calming everyone's hearts. He shouted, "Don't stray, stay together," and then he took out part of the standard equipment for all Immortal Alliance conference participants, a rescue firework, and released it into the sky. The rescue fireworks were given to disciples to ask for help if they encountered a monster they were not able to handle. The Immortal Alliance conference would not release any excessively dangerous monsters, and using a rescue firework 3 times would automatically forfeit your right to participate. On top of that, the conference wouldn't push you to such extremes, so no one really used the fireworks. However, at that moment, glittering bursts of fireworks rose one after another in the sky over Judi Gorge. This should have been a beautiful scene, but right then, not only did these fireworks not seem gorgeous, they made everyone's insides twist in fear, because every blossoming firework represented a disciple who had encountered an extremely dreadful monster, whose life was in danger. "The crystal mirrors! Look at the crystal mirrors!" Blood-curdling shrieks and wails of distress came in an unending stream from the crystal mirrors. Some disciples were already corpses on the ground. Some disciples were still struggling, soaked with blood, gazes full of terror. "Why? Why here? There shouldn't be! Someone help! Shifu, save me! Shige, save!" Suddenly a hoarse cry came from a crystal mirror, then the mournful shriek of a spiritual eagle, and the picture went out, becoming a flat, black screen. Everyone stared blankly. What happened? The hoarse cry was definitely the cry of the demon realm's bone eagle, a type of aerial demonic beast that was both fierce and bloodthirsty. The spiritual eagle had probably been torn apart by it, its crystals shattered into dust. Ones that swam in the water, ones that walked on land, ones that flew through the air. These fierce demonic beasts were definitely not planned by the conference. Though he had made mental preparations long ago, when such an enormous scene of chaos played out before him, Shen Qingqiu realized, with his scalp numb and his fingers icy cold, he could not do as he'd previously expected, and pretend he was watching the climax of an ultra-realistic show. Outside of Judi Gorge, pandemonium had already broken out on the dais. Tianyi Monastery's cultivator said sternly, "What is happening? The demonic beasts chosen for the conference were set by strict rules and selection. How could something that lives only in the demon realm, like the Nu Yanshan, mix its way in?" Many Huanha Palace disciples had already died, and the old palace master shot to his feet. "Open the barrier!" The giant barrier covering Judi Gorge was supported by nearly 100 monks from Xiaohua Temple. The Xiaohua Temple abbot immediately went to use a long-distance voice transferal spell to tell the monks to release the barrier, when Yu Qingyuan suddenly said, "You cannot!" The old palace master startled. "Sect leader Yue, what is the meaning of this?" Over 100 of Kangchong Mountain's disciples were in Judi Gorge, participating in the conference. Yet Yu Qingyuan refused to let them open the barrier so the disciples could escape. Obviously there was an exceptional reason. Shen Qingqiu had long figured it out and responded in Yu Qingyuan's place. "Once you release the barrier, the disciples can get out, but the demonic beasts trapped within can also escape and scatter. There are villages only a few miles from here. The situation would become even more grave. Sect members and disciples at least have the ability to deal with them, but common people with no energy at all." After this, all the elders and sect leaders on the platform had no words of retort and fell into a dead silence. At this sort of time, no matter how great your cultivation, core formation, or nascent soul, or whatnot, there was no way to reverse the flow of events. A cultivator said, stunned, If we cannot open the barrier to let them out, then what should we do? Liu Qingge said, "If they can't leave, we must enter." All the Kangchong Mountain members exchanged a look in tacit agreement. Yu Qingyuan said gravely, "Fellow cultivators, there must be someone behind this, hoping to use the demonic beast to wipe out the cultivation world's new talent and future pillars in one fell swoop. For the sake of this moment, we can only maintain the barrier. But are any fellow cultivators willing to enter the gorge with my Kangchong Mountain sect, to clear out the beasts and rescue the participating disciples? To carve out a path of blood from inside, clear out all the demonic beasts, required not only martial power, but also much courage." The old palace master was the first to respond. It would dishonor Huanhua Palace to refuse. In this Immortal Alliance conference, Huanhua Palace sent the most participants, and had invested the most as well. They were the party most unable to take the loss. With someone taking the lead, the others immediately followed, volunteers offering one after another. Even if there were a few cowards in the crowd, they would also be reminded their own talented, precious disciples were all inside. Shen Qingchu stepped forward, ready to stand with the group volunteering to provide assistance, when Liu Qingge slightly altered his steps and used his sword sheath to block Shen Qingchu's way. Without a change in expression, Shen Qingchu pushed the sheath aside with 2 fingers. "What is the meaning of this?" Liu Qingge said succinctly, "Your poison." Yu Qingyuan said, "That's right. Your without a cure has yet to be resolved. As for the safety of Qingjing Peak's disciples, entrust it to us. If his poison suddenly acted up after he entered Judi Gorge, with his spiritual energy stalling while surrounded by swarms of demonic beasts, then neither heaven nor earth would be able to help him." Shen Qingchu shook his head and said, "How can a master hide and relax on a dais while his disciples are in danger? If I cannot even protect my own disciples, I don't deserve to be Qingjing Peak's Peak Lord." And he was a vital character for triggering a crucial plot point. If he's not on the scene, they can't keep filming, huh? Ding dong, system notification. Making the villain more three-dimensional by crafting an honorable image. B points plus 30. Shen Qingchu internally rolled his eyes. "Are you handing me a piece of candy before stabbing me?" Yue Qingyuan and the others had failed to dissuade him, and could only reluctantly say, "Then you must be careful. If you cannot manage, immediately use a voice transferal spell and call for backup." Shen Qingchu was not as pessimistic as them about his own ability to handle demonic beasts. His confidence in his own cultivation and spiritual power aside, his interest in these beasts in proud immortal demon way far surpassed his interest in all those flavors of women. He might not remember where each female protagonist liked to go scar-gaze with Luo Binghe after being slighted, sometimes to the point of being unable to match names and characters, but he definitely remembered each demonic beast's attributes and weaknesses well and clear. His knowledge of the plot aside, if you had to find something about him that could be called his golden finger, it could only be this. In Judi Gorge, Luo Binghe had just calmed a crowd of terror-stricken junior disciples. At this sort of time, they must not fall into disarray. If they encountered some new demonic beast or someone strayed away, the situation could get more disastrous. The night wind whipped by, and wails and howls, impossible to tell if they came from human or demonic throats, sounded from all around. The faint-hearted ones were already curled up and sobbing. Qin Wanyu's face was deathly pale, but seeing Luo Binghe leaning against a tree, Zhen Yang clasped hilt up within crossed arms, calm yet on alert, protecting them against any attacks that came from the darkness. A tender trace of fondness couldn't help but well up. If Shen Qingchu was here, he would definitely get incredibly excited, his gossip soul blazing. "Girl, you've fallen in love with him!" At this time, rustling noises suddenly came from the shrubbery. Luo Binghe's gaze became severe, and he gathered spiritual energy into his palm, waiting to strike. The rustling sounds in the brush grew louder and louder, closer and closer. Everyone's hearts were in their throats. Perhaps they were all terrified beyond belief, because not even one let out a scream. Suddenly there was a plop, like someone had collapsed to the ground. Then a round object rolled out of the bushes. It was a human head. Both of the eyes were tightly closed, the face covered in blood, its hair disheveled like a chicken's nest. Normally the scene would have been frightening, but at this time a harmless corpse's head was better than a man-eating demonic beast, so quite a few sighed in relief. Qin Wanyu said, her voice trembling, Does anyone know which sect this Shishong belonged to?" Disciples from various different sects stepped closer, one after another, to check, but all of them sighed in relief. "Not one of ours. Never seen him before." Luo Binghe gazed into the dark and the depths of the shrubbery, thinking, if the head was here, the body should be nearby. It would be better to look at the sect uniform. He strengthened the spiritual flow in his palm and walked towards the dark. As expected, a stiff corpse lay behind the shrubbery, wearing aqua-blue cultivator robes. Must be one of Tianyi Monastery's newly accepted disciples. Luo Binghe saw only the hem of his robes before sighing. Newly accepted disciples like this one must have come to the Immortal Alliance conference to gain experience, and never thought they'd be drawn into an unforeseen disaster and lose their lives. He looked further up and froze in shock. There was still a perfectly good head on top of this corpse's neck. Then where did that head just now come from? Zhen Yang had already left its sheath before Luo Binghe finished doubling back. As its white light overflowed, he yelled, "Get away from the head!" Before he finished speaking, the head, quietly lying askew on the ground, suddenly opened its eyes. With wide, glowering eyes, it met everyone's gazes, and then suddenly, 8 spindly, segmented, barbed spider legs stretched forth from somewhere at the bottom of its neck, and it leaped in a single bound. The closest person could not avoid in time, and it jumped onto the head. With a crazed howl, he drew his sword and wildly swung it around, causing everyone nearby to hurriedly move away. Luo Binghe dared not attack carelessly. In case he stabbed the person's head instead of the monster, the result would be too horrible to imagine. Having something this terrifying crawling back and forth on your head would be enough to suffocate you in fright. In complete despair, the person changed the direction of his sword and struck towards his own head. But before he could strike, those 8 spindly legs had found their target and ferociously speared into his temples. He immediately went stiff, and like even his tongue had twisted into knots, he was unable to yell a single word. The spider legs sticking out of the human head bored deeper and deeper, and his whole body began to twitch unceasingly. After only a moment, those 8 spider legs drew back out, leaving nothing but the gory holes in his temples. It seemed like everything in his skull had been sucked clean, completely empty. The scene was utterly terrifying. Even Luo Binghe remained frozen for a time, unable to react. Having eaten its fill of brains, the human-headed, spider-looking monster crawled up and down the corpse, letting out a mournful scream like a baby's wail. Just then, an arrow of light formed from the spiritual energy flew over, and pierced right into its still howling mouth, skewering a hole clean through. Amidst the sudden silence and everyone's dazed stares, Shen Qingqiu rubbed his sore ears, slowly shook out his sleeve, and with a snap of his fan murmured, "Shut up." This arrival of his was truly quite low-key. Trying so hard to be cool. Alright, that is the chapter 24. We are now on chapter 25, Endless Abyss, part 1. Shizun! Upon suddenly seeing Shen Qingqiu, Luo Binghe was far happier than he was shocked. After all, ever since the mayhem started, he'd anticipated Shen Qingqiu would definitely worry and personally enter the gorge to rescue them. Shen Qingqiu swiftly righted himself. Upon seeing many disciples coming to surround him, he asked, "Is anyone injured?" Luo Binghe said, "Other than the riverside, those shimeis and the shidi who died from being drained, at this moment we've suffered no other harm." Shen Qingqiu said, "You've been put through much trouble." Luo Binghe gave a smile, his eyes shining brightly. "This disciple was only doing my duty." Shen Qingqiu glanced at the still red-rimmed Qin Wanyu and thought, "You can still smile? Don't you know one of your wives is dead?" Upon seeing a powerful senior had appeared to rescue them, the group of disciples each acted like they saw their mother, stopping just short of clinging to his thighs and wailing. Shen Qingqiu said, "There's no need to panic or be afraid. The sect leaders outside know about the situation, and large numbers of seniors have already entered to help. Protect yourselves well. Soon we'll be able to break out." These words of his were like a calming agent. The youths who'd been frightened out of their wits absorbed them and became at ease. Luo Binghe said, "Shizun, just now, what exactly was that?" When it came to proud immortal demon ways, demonic beasts, he'd asked the right person. Shen Qingqiu spoke with great familiarity. "It's no surprise you've never seen one. That is a ghost-head spider. Mean-tempered and with a terrifying appearance, it can mimic the sound of crying infants, and uses it to lure prey. Once the prey approaches, the suction pads below its head will firmly grip the top of the prey's head. Its 8 legs are incredibly sharp and can pierce right through skulls to drain the brains of living creatures." Luo Binghe listened to his incredibly detailed explanation and was filled with both admiration and awe. To think such an evil creature exists in this world! This disciple is truly too ignorant. Ever since Luo Binghe started apprenticing under Meng Mo, the guidance Shen Qingqiu could give him on martial and sword techniques became fewer and fewer. Now there was a rare chance to show off as a master before his disciple. Shen Qingqiu was secretly incredibly gratified, feeling like he'd finally found his long-lost teacher's halo. Ghost-head spiders are a demonic specialty, unsuited to the human realm's environments. It's already been many years since there were any sightings, so naturally they don't appear in most reference compilations. Next time you see one, remember to strike directly at its temples. Just now that was a male one. Fortunately, we didn't meet a female, otherwise it would have been more terrifying. The two of them had yet to say much when rustling noises came from the surrounding leaves above them. Heads suspended upside down from threads of white silk appeared one by one from the trees. Shen Qingqiu's expression completely changed. Ghost-head spiders' cries would attract large numbers of them to encircle and attack. He fanned outwards, releasing a powerful gust of wind and immediately snapping dozens of silk threads. Like overripe fruit, the ghost-head spider smashed into the ground with thuds. Shen Qingqiu yelled, "Go!" Luo Binghe quickly gave a reply. While the ghost-head spiders were dazed and reeling, the group began to run. Master and disciple, one in the lead, carving a path, the other bringing up the rear. Together they sandwiched the bloated procession, the two ends slaughtering until it rained blood, the air thick with the smell of carnage. Ghost-headed spiders were agile and with incredible jumping ability. As they flew and leapt through the air, the disordered spiritual blasts exchanged between the pair punctured them until they became sieves. Once he knew how to deal with them, it was like Luo Binghe became divinely blessed, practically able to pierce at least 2 in a single blow with his eyes closed. The scene above their heads was a mess of blood and gore, anguished wails, and monstrous howls. Even if that was the case, in the end there were just too many, impossible to defend against. Shen Qingqiu was just worrying about the goddamn hack of a poison acting up when he felt his power stagnate, his next strike coming up empty. Speak of the devil. Shen Qingqiu quickly redirected the flow of his energy into a physical attack. With a flip of his hand, his fan sliced through the ghost-head spider, lunging towards him horizontally into 2. Luo Binghe had always been paying attention to his situation. Upon seeing something was off, he asked, "Shizun?" Shen Qingqiu rushed to say, "It's nothing. Focus on yourself." "Hello, Cyan. I hope I said that right. Welcome, everyone." Check my message. Alright. We'll finish this chapter, I think? Yeah, we're alright. Fortunately, under Shen Qingqiu's lead, they'd already retreated into a particular area. As if encountering an invisible barrier, the ghost-head spiders didn't dare continue advancing, and instead wailed and howled while falling back. One moment. Hello? Okay. Alright, guys. I will be right back. I'm gonna go grab my groceries, and then we will continue. Alright, we are back. Fortunately, under Shen Qingchu's lead, they'd already retreated into a particular area. As if encountering an invisible barrier, the ghost head spiders didn't dare continue advancing, and instead wailed and howled while falling back, until they withdrew into the shrubbery and vanished. Shen Qingchu gave a sigh of relief. Delicately panting with an expression of uncertainty, Qin Wanyu asked, "Senior Shen, why were those demonic beasts unwilling to approach once we came here?" Shen Qingchu said, "Have you forgotten what kind of mystical flower grows in Judi Gorge?" In truth, the one who forgot was him. Forgive him for not remembering the flower's name. Luo Binghe very considerately remembered for him and spoke the name right away. "Thousand Leaves Fresh Snow Lotus!" Shen Qingchu finally knew why he couldn't remember the mystical flower's name. Snow blank or blank lotus mystical flowers swamped the work with this naming format. They were so common, and they were already far beyond a dime a dozen. Like hell anyone could remember. Shen Qingchu said, "Correct. This is indeed the Thousand Leaves Fresh Snow Lotus. This flower has grown within the depths of Judi Gorge for thousands of years. Its spiritual chi is extraordinary, and furthermore, it's the natural bane of demon realm creatures. Its surroundings naturally form a barrier that repel demonic beasts. Therefore, as long as we're within the protected region, there won't be too many attacks from them." Luo Binghe suddenly pressed, "The natural bane of demon realm creatures?" He'd been listening with rapt attention the entire time. Upon seeing how blazing sparks had seemed to ignite within his gaze, a peculiar quality faintly flickering there, Shen Qingchu thought it strange. "Yes?" Luo Binghe said, "Then, Shizun, this thousand-leaf fresh snow lotus, can it cure demonic poison?" Shen Qingchu was horrified. This attitude, Luo Binghe couldn't be hoping to pick the mystical flower and cure him, right? Halt. The girl you picked the flower for in the original work, Qin Wanyu, is watching right next to us, and in her presence, for someone else, a big strong man to boot, you want to pick the flower? Give your future wife some face, all right? Shen Qingchu immediately said, "We should handle the crisis before us first." Yet Luo Binghe wouldn't let it go. "This disciple asks for Shizun's teaching." Shen Qingchu said, "It cannot." Luo Binghe insisted, "Has Shizun tried before? If we don't try, how can we know? This disciple knows Shizun doesn't want me to take chances, but if we don't take this chance, this disciple will never be at peace." "This is really not the time. Why, at this critical juncture, must you be so filial to me? I can't tell you that the only way to completely cure the poison is to pa-pa-pa with you, alright?" I don't know if they've mentioned that before, but because this is, of course, a world based on a book about a harem and a bunch of sex, the flower only works if you have sex with the main character. So for Shen Qingchu's poison to be cured, he will have to eventually have sex with Luo Binghe. That's the big plot twist. But of course he doesn't want to say that to his impressionable little apprentice. Shen Qingchu couldn't say it to him clearly. His expression became cold. "Has this master indulged you too much normally and made you think you can willfully fool around even at a time like this?" To tell the truth, over the years, due to his strange desire to preemptively atone, along with other sentiments as components, he never spoke even the slightest bit harshly to this disciple. So after Luo Binghe heard his words, he first startled, then, as expected, obediently shut his mouth. But his gaze remained obstinate, refusing to resheath Sang Yang, obviously unwilling to back off. Just as the two were in a deadlock, the dense overgrowth of grass and leaves leapt and a person came out. Behind him even followed a group of battered and exhausted disciples who had gone through a bloody struggle. On guard, Shen Qingchu moved his gaze away, and as soon as he came face to face with that person, he felt like a giant hammer from the sky had smashed into his temples. In truth, this person's appearance could be considered proper and handsome, just that within his words and actions there was an air of sleaziness that couldn't be removed. Seeing Shen Qingchu, he smiled, returning his sword, flowing with light, back to its sheath. "So, it was Shen Shishong. Being able to meet up with you puts my heart at ease." At ease. At ease, my ass. With you here, I can't be at ease, okay? The person in front of him was the main culprit behind the huge mayhem this time, and one of my favorite characters in this book were finally to him. Shang Qinghua, a character that Shen Qingqiu had mentally Tsukuyomi'd before, goes to Tsinghua University. I even passed Beijing University's exam. Okay, what does this even mean? Let's see here. Okay, so that's some kind of Chinese language joke that I'm not understanding. But basically, this is a new character, Shang Qinghua, who is behind all the monsters being in the gorge, and is kind of sort of a bad guy, but not really. We'll learn more about him. At the same time, he had another important identity. He was the spy behind the Immortal Alliance Conference disaster, a pawn planted many years ago by the demons. Originally, Shang Qinghua was only one of Anding Peak's many insignificant, nameless disciples, but he'd been captured by demons and forced to become a mole. He wasn't really forced. He happily took on the important task of being a mole without even a hint of discomfort. With the demons secretly backing him up, Shang Qinghua's road became smooth sailing, swiftly rising in rank until he actually obtained the position of Anding Peak's Peak Lord. However, he still wasn't satisfied. And why not? Because it was Anding Peak. As soon as you heard the name, you knew it wouldn't be a place with ambition. The peak's tradition and specialty was completely along the lines of its name, logistics work. So of course the entire peak from top to bottom, including the Peak Lord, were like bricks, and moved wherever they were needed. Send some cheap laborers here today, assist with supplies tomorrow. Mountain gates broken? Get Anding Peak to fix it. Missing a carriage driver? Get Anding Peak to send someone. This month's expenses above quota and need more money? Get Anding Peak to make a report. This kind of Peak Lord, even if their professional competence could trounce Langshans and New Orientals, were they impressive? Were they imposing? Were they cool, awesome, insane, badass, or hype? Did they have the dignity of a Peak Lord? Even a talented, low-level disciple from another peak would have more to brag about. So Shang Qinghua had become a demon flunky without hesitation. He took it upon himself to help the demons conquer the human realm and did all kinds of evil. Shen Qingqiu's stomach hurt as soon as he saw him. Shang Shidi, when you came, did you see a large demonic beast nearby? Shang Qinghua froze, then said, "A large demonic beast? There wasn't one." Shang Qingqiu's heart thumped. There wasn't. The large demonic beast here was one of the plotline's key props. In the original work, the reason Luo Binghei's demonic heritage was exposed was because a Black Moon python rhino had been released into the Immortal Alliance Conference. Bye, Crom. Thanks for joining us. Have a good one. To protect the others, Luo Binghei fought a life and death struggle. The Black Moon python rhino's destructive power and body were both enormous. Of course he couldn't win. What to do if he couldn't win? Activate Seed Mode! Which is a reference to Mobile Suit Gundam, so basically activating his superpowers. Therefore, Luo Binghei exposed himself in front of Shen Qingqiu, and therefore only then did Shen Qingqiu have the reason of eliminating him for justice, striking him down so he could level up. Up to now, Shen Qingqiu had not sensed the Black Moon python rhino's demonic chi, much less heard the legendary mystery of a moonward howl, like that of both a python and a rhinoceros. God, the characters, the creatures in this book are wild. What is a python rhino? I really want to know. Now, Shang Qinghua said he hadn't seen it, so he couldn't help raising his guard. Without this key prop, surely they couldn't ask him to suddenly give Luo Binghei a kick without any justification. He couldn't help but glance at the silent, unspeaking Luo Binghei. The child was still struggling over the matter of whether he could cure the poison, pick the flower. There was a stubborn glint in his eyes, as if he felt a little aggrieved. Aggrieved my ass! I'm doing it for your own good! If you're going to pick flowers, don't give them to the wrong person, thank you. Lamenting and full of grief, Shang Qinghua said, On my way here, we'd already lost quite a few disciples from various sects. These were all future pillars of the cultivation world. The person who released these demonic creatures is truly poisonous and shameless, underhanded and vulgar, cruel to the point of insanity. Shen Qingqiu was speechless. Weren't you the one who released those creatures? Are you really okay using these lines to attack yourself? Although, if you don't mind, that's fine. The earth began to shake without warning. Everyone staggered and fell all over the place, each terrified and at a loss, their questioning voices merging into one. Shen Qingchu's pupils contracted abruptly. This feeling of a magnitude 7.5 earthquake absolutely couldn't be mistaken. The endless abyss had finally been opened. Dun dun dun. Get some water. Hey, Katsuki, welcome. Go to the next chapter. Alright. Let's see here. Chapter 26, Endless Abyss. The so-called Endless Abyss was a place on the boundary between the human and demon realm. The Endless Abyss as a transitional space was full of peril and the unknown. Vortices that warped and tore space, raging flames, burning magma were everywhere to be found. The disciples on the scene had fought the entire way, and their bodies and hearts had long been completely exhausted. After the violent quake, most of them had tumbled to the ground. Only Shen Qingchu, Luo Binghe, and Shang Qinghua had managed to stay standing. Since the Endless Abyss had been opened, this meant something demonic would definitely appear from the other side. The three held their breaths in anticipation, silently waiting in full alert. The figure of a man slowly emerged from the shadows. As soon as he saw that icy cold face and aloof expression, Shen Qingchu knew who it was. He shot a glance at Shang Qinghua, whose whole face had suddenly gone white, wanting to laugh but unable to. Why would Luo Binghe's future subordinate, his excellent right hand and engine oil for committing evil deeds, murder, and mayhem, show up right here and now? Mobei Jun was a pure-blooded demon, and very orthodoxly was heir to a demonic household. In the future, he would inherit his family's territory on the demonic border in the north, and spend all his time appearing and disappearing at will, idling his time away, completely indifferent to everyone. And this maverick of a character had been beaten up by Luo Binghe, who was in the middle of becoming overpowered, and unfathomably had capitulated to Luo Binghe to be ordered about. From then on, Luo Binghe had gained a very badass-looking errand runner and loyal sidekick. But to make it clear, according to the timeline in the original, there should still be 500 chapters before it's your turn to debut, Grandmaster. Shang Qinghua rushed ahead and yelled, "Who are you, good sire? Why have you come to this place?" "Isn't that your real boss? Wasn't he the one who ordered you to release these dangerous creatures? Please, go right up and keep pretending." Mobei Jun tilted his head. Half of his handsome silhouette sank into the darkness, a chilling sight. With a flick of his fingers, Shang Qinghua was flung into the air by sudden force, crashed into an old tree and fainted, blood spurting unceasingly from his mouth, spurting until Shen Qingchu couldn't help but sigh with respect. Such effort, such dedication. Bro, you sure do a lot for your career. After paying his respects, he sighed again. He knew it, but in the end, he would still need to step in. Holding his sword before him, Shen Qingchu spoke, neither humble nor haughty. A demon. The line was pointless bullshit. If you couldn't see the murky billows of demonic chi, you were blind. A white figure flashed past. Without saying a word, Luo Binghe had moved to stand in front of him. They'd just argued and were now facing a strong enemy, yet he was still playing the role of human shield without hesitation. It would be a lie to say Shen Qingchu was entirely unmoved. But the more moved he was, the more he felt what he was about to do was too awful. Shen Qingchu would rather he'd done nothing at all. "Binghe, stand down." Luo Binghe did not reply and did not leave. He calmly met eyes with Mobei Jun, entirely unmoved by his power. Mobei Jun let out an of curiosity, like he'd found something that aroused his interest a little. Shen Qingchu said, "What disciple has to shield his master?" Mobei Jun said, "You are a disciple of Kangchong Mountain?" Luo Binghe replied coldly, "Kangchong Mountain Qingjing Peak disciple Luo Binghe. Thanks this distinguished one for the guidance." Mobei Jun sneered. "The immortal acts unlike an immortal, and the demon acts unlike a demon. Interesting." Hearing this, Shen Qingchu finally caught on to something. Could it be Mobei Jun appearing here was to substitute the Black Moon Python Rhino as a prop for advancing the main storyline. Immortal probably referred to Shang Qinghua, who was lying off to the side and playing dead, while still remembering to cough up blood. Though clearly a cultivator, he tirelessly labored for the demonic realm, indeed completely unlike an immortal. It was a fair accusation. As for the demon, who on the scene could this be referring to other than Luo Binghe? Shen Qingqiu couldn't be certain if Mo Beijun could really see through Luo Binghei's hidden bloodline with a single glance, but his thoughts twisted and whirled. Seeing him furrow his brow, Luo Binghe thought he was angry about his own disobedience and said, "Shizun, he won't let any of us go. It'd be better to stake all our strength and fight this battle together." "It's true, but it's also fucking useless," Shen Qingqiu said. "If you stay here, you'll be losing your life in vain." Luo Binghe said, "Dying for Shizun or dying together with Shizun is something this disciple is gladly willing to do." Mo Beijun scoffed. "Battle with me?" The following, such foolish arrogance, was politely left unspoken. Shen Qingqiu thought, "Good thing you didn't say it out loud. In 3 years, Luo Binghe will be able to single-handedly beat you until you can't get up. And didn't you still diligently become his henchman? You'd really be slapping your own face." Mo Beijun said, "Fine, then let me see." Before he'd finished speaking, the bloodlust in the air around them surged. His steps agile and unreadable, Shen Qingqiu immediately flashed in front of Luo Binghe, tossing Shu Ya forth with his left, to hold him off for a first bit, even if it might be ineffective. At the same time, he lifted Luo Binghe like an eagle with a chick with his right hand and hurled him away. After sending him outside the range of Mo Beijun's demonic chi, he turned around and met palms with Mo Beijun. When their palms connected, blood churned in Shen Qingqiu's chest, as if someone had punched him there, all the spiritual energy in his body surging until it was boiling over. Though he'd already formed a core, and his cultivation was not low, what was a golden core to the future demon lord Luo Binghe's right hand? But he had to go all out and try. Disregarding his own life in a desperate battle to the death was the only strategy for survival. According to Shen Qingqiu's experience from 10+ years of reading all sorts of wuxia and zhanxia novels, formidable number 2s with eccentric personalities would have some respect for hard-headed types who fight bloody battles to the end and refuse to admit defeat. But they definitely would not show any mercy to cowards and weaklings. Having been caught off guard and hurled away by Shen Qingqiu, Luo Binghe doubled back, unsheathing Shang Yang. Mo Beijun spared one hand to flick away the advancing white sword glare. Shen Yang couldn't withstand the massive influx of demonic energy, and in an explosion of white light shattered into pieces on the ground. He was holding off both Shen Qingqiu's hands with one, still overwhelmingly held the upper hand. Bored, he blasted Shen Qingqiu away and said, "Unusually inferior talent. Foundation and techniques inflexible. Get out." Shen Qingqiu wasn't some unmatched genius in the human realm, but his talent was still at least 1 in 1,000, and Kangxiang Mountain's foundation and techniques were not inflexible, they were orthodox. Under Mo Beijun's description, it was all a pile of garbage. If the original goods had heard this, he'd have coughed up 3 liters of blood and gone back crying to make a voodoo doll. Luo Binghe did not care his sword was broken, but when he saw Shen Qingqiu injured, blood dripping from between gritted teeth, his gaze frosted over, the aura around him changing in an instant. Sensing the shocking change, a cold flash of interest shot through Mo Beijun's faintly blue eyes. He suddenly summoned a pure black sword of ice out of thin air. One became 2, 2 became 4, 4 became 8, instantly dividing into an array of hundreds of ice swords that shot at the surrounded Shen Qingqiu from all directions. Normal methods of defense were utterly incapable of blocking the ice swords, because they were formed from the purest demonic chi. Shen Qingqiu's spiritual chi was nearly exhausted. If the two collided, it would be like a single spark against a towering wave. What the result would be went without saying. The instant the sword array was about to come down like sheets of rain, Shen Qingqiu roared within his heart, "I've done my best, and he still thinks I'm low-level trash. What can I do? How loathsome. If I have to die, couldn't it at least be in a better-looking way? Stabbing me with hundreds of swords like this, I'll become a sieve. Who could stand to look?" However, even a long time later, the pain of being skewered did not arrive. If Mo Beijun had suddenly changed his mind and revoked the sword array, there was one possibility. only one person who could have blocked the attack that surged with murderous intent. Shen Qingqiu steadied himself, then slowly raised his head. As expected, in the air all around him, the forest of swords had already shattered. They'd shattered so completely it was as if they'd disappeared without a trace, leaving only a night sky full of black ice crystals, reflecting the moonlight. They fell one by one. The scene could be described as beautiful. However, Luo Binghe, who was standing in the middle of the scene, a blizzard seeming to roar around him and within his gaze, could only be described as terrifying. Shen Qingqiu sat next to a large tree, swallowing down mouthfuls of blood and circulated energy to heal his wounds, while watching the earth-shaking showdown between two demon lords. The seal on Luo Binghe's blood had yet to be removed. Mobe Jun was only testing him, but still this battle darkened the sky and earth, blotting out all light. From both of them overflowed raging waves of demonic energy, enough to cloak the entire sky. The area should have been within the 1,000 Leaves Fresh Snow Lotus. That's what the thing was called, right? Right. Within the surroundings of the fresh snow lotus, demonic creatures would be afraid to approach. But as soon as this inescapable smog of demonic chi touched it, the snow lotus, overflowing with spiritual energy, wilted and rotted down to the roots, and all the creatures hiding in the dark crawled out, one by one, greedily inhaling what to them was a fragrant scent. Several ghost-head spiders stealthily crawled onto a few of the Kangchong mountain disciples, hairy legs posed to stab into their temples. Shen Qingqiu was nearly out of energy and was unable to use spell attacks. He could only directly grab them by their filthy, tangled hair and throw them aside. He checked before he threw, making sure to toss them onto that traitor Shang Qinghua. On the other side, Mobe Jun had pretty much finished testing Luo Binghe and prepared to wrap things up, sent out one last blow. With a flick of his finger, he fired a stream of scarlet light right into the center of Luo Binghe's forehead. Once the stream of light touched his forehead, it immediately seeped into his skin, turning into a fiery red mark. Luo Binghe was lost in bloodlust. He didn't know what it was, only that his head was aching like it was about to explode, and nearly collapsed to his knees. His entire body roiled with an urge for savage cruelty. Unable to vent it, he threw out his hand, and an eruption of demonic chi, as if shot out of a cannon, descended upon Mobe Jun. This last strike was extremely powerful. Mobe Jun waved it away with one hand, a bit surprised, and praised, "Not bad." Ignoring Luo Binghe's current mental state, he continued by himself, "The human realm is not where you belong. Why not return to your origins?" Now Shen Qingqiu was finally 100% sure. Mobe Jun's suddenly appearance was indeed to substitute for the rhino... Sorry, this word just makes me laugh. Was indeed to substitute for the Black Moon Python Rhino. But compared to the original, Mobe Jun had done his job more completely. He'd actually directly removed the seal, suppressing Luo Binghe's demonic blood. Dun dun dun! Chapter 27, Endless Abyss, Part 3. After completing his task, he turned right around and left. The NPC really played his role thoroughly. He wasn't even the slightest bit sloppy. Completely identical to the original work, he'd showed up wherever Luo Binghe needed him without rhyme or reason. His actions were just that forced, that maverick, not needing a shred of logic. Speaking of forced, that could only be what Shen Qingqiu had to face next. The last level. Having fought a harsh battle, Luo Binghe was half-kneeling in the midst of ruins, eyes vacant. Yet he looked like he'd start rampaging at any moment. Right now his mind was like a dormant volcano, one silent for many years that had suddenly erupted, the magma in its veins starting to flow. Just thinking about this made Shen Qingqiu feel like he was burning up along with, until his bones and head began to ache and pound. The system sent a shrill notification, the likes of which he'd never heard before. "Warning! Critical quest! The endless abyss and endless hatred, a sky filled with crystal frost and tears of blood, has officially started. If completion is unsuccessful, protagonist satisfaction points minus 20,000. Does the quest item name seem to get increasingly absurd each time until I don't know where to start ranting? Or is that just my imagination? And 2 days ago, when I confirmed it with you, didn't it say 10,000? After only a couple of days, it's doubled? Swaying, Shen Qingqiu walked over to Luo Binghe, who was still in a half-crazed state, and aimed a couple of palm strikes at his back, channeling some of his own remaining spiritual energy into his body. You think it's that easy? Dream on. Not only did Luo Binghe fail to regain consciousness, the demonic qi within his body rebounded instead, instantly forcing Shen Qingqiu to cough up the mouthful of blood he'd been holding back for so long. Only at this moment did Luo Binghe finally regain some consciousness. He slowly pulled himself out of his muddled state and managed to piece together a couple of mangled words. The familiar face gradually came into focus. Shen Qingqiu saw his eyes had cleared up a bit and let out a sigh of relief. He wiped at the blood by his mouth and said in an even tone, "Awake?" After a pause, he replied, "If you're awake, let's have a thorough discussion." Shen Qingqiu said, "Luo Binghe, tell me honestly, exactly how long have you been practicing demonic cultivation?" As soon as the line was said, it was as if Luo Binghe had plunged from the stifling upper heavens into a bone-chilling pool. It was impossible to not regain complete consciousness. He looked at Shen Qingqiu's icy cold face, and his heart sank right down. In the past, Shen Qingqiu had always called him Binghe, never his whole name directly. He said in a quiet voice, "Shizun, this disciple can explain." Though Luo Binghe was still a youth, he'd always remained calm and unperturbed, acting mature beyond his years, but now on his face actually surfaced an expression of panic, like he was frantic to explain but didn't know where to start. Seeing the magnificent male lead reduced to this state, Shen Qingqiu couldn't stand to watch anymore. He burst out and cut him off. "Silence!" His voice had just left his mouth, and he already felt he hadn't controlled himself properly, that his tone had been overly harsh. He also seemed to have scared Luo Binghe. Like a child who'd been slapped, muddled and confused, he simply stared at him blankly with pitch-black eyes, and indeed obediently went silent. Shen Qingqiu couldn't harden his heart enough to look him in the eyes, and stiffly recited a line. "When did you start?" 2 years ago?" Shen Qingqiu went silent and didn't speak. To answer his question quickly and directly, as well as so honestly, it looked like he really was scared witless. Unbeknown to him, Luo Binghe automatically took his silence as, "Very good, you wicked disciple, hiding this from me for so long." Shen Qingqiu said quietly, 2 years. No wonder you were able to progress in leaps and bounds to this extent. Luo Binghe, as expected, you are truly gifted with spectacular talent. In truth, this line of his was purely to express the laments within his heart. As the male lead, Luo Binghe was indeed gifted with spectacular talent. If Shen Qingqiu absolutely had to describe what he was expressing, it was envy, with a tiny bit of jealousy. But to Luo Binghe's ears, the meaning was completely different. He instantly fell to his knees before Shen Qingqiu. Shen Qingqiu's soul almost left his body. If a man kneeling was worth gold, the male lead kneeling meant your life. Letting him kneel at this critical juncture when Luo Binghe remembered in the future, wouldn't his hatred be compounded? He waved his sleeve at once. "Get up!" Hit by the gust from the sleeve, Luo Binghe couldn't help but stand again, even backing up a few steps, more stunned out of his wits. Had he done something wrong? Something so wrong it couldn't be absolved, that he didn't even have the right to kneel and plead Shizun for forgiveness? He mumbled, "But Shizun, you said before, people can be good or bad, demons can be good or evil, that in this world there is no one intolerable to the heavens." I said that? It had been many years. Shen Qingqiu thought intently for a while. Seemed like he'd really said that. But that was then, when he'd been considering a far-off future. This was now, in a crisis with a blade suspended above his throat. It was a last resort, but if he slapped his own face by doubling down, would it be a little too shameless? "You are not a normal demon," Shen Qingqiu said. "That mark on your forehead is the mark of sin of the demons who fell from heaven. This group has murdered countless humans, and moreover, the temperaments they have are difficult to contain. From ancient times, they've been at the center of calamity upon calamity." Hearing Shen Qingqiu say this with his very own ears, Luo Binghei's hopes shattered, and the rims of his eyes reddened. His voice quivered. But you said so before." "I've said many things, okay? Back then I made several hundred posts in bright red font about wanting to castrate Shen Qingqiu. It wasn't the slightest bit funny. Today, Shen Qingqiu, who'd always been good at adjusting himself mentally, reached a new high in ridiculing and ranting, madly smashing through his own records, but he still couldn't put himself at ease, and instead only felt more tired and worn out. He unceasingly brainwashed himself. The suffering and torment Luo Binghei would go through now was all necessary experience for him to stand above the masses in the future. Without going through the bone-chilling cold, how could there be the fragrance of plum blossoms? Without entering the chasm, how could there be a world-destroying demon king? Zinmo in hand, he'd possess everything beneath the heavens. With a harem innumerable, he need not be a beta male. But it was useless. It was completely useless. Nothing could lift his spirits. Shen Qingqiu suddenly raised his head and formed a sword seal, summoning Shu Ya to himself, and held it within his hand. The hand wielding the sword shook slightly, thin veins surfacing through the skin. Luo Binghei still couldn't believe it. "Shizun, do you really want to kill me?" Unable to look at his expression, Shen Qingqiu's gaze went right through his finger. "I don't want to kill you." Within Luo Binghei's memory, he'd never seen Shen Qingqiu so cold and emotionless toward him. Even back when he'd just entered Kangchong Mountain Sect, when Shizun had disliked him, his eyes had never been this empty, like he was looking at nothing. There wasn't even a trace of warmth, exactly the way he'd looked at those heinous demons that were to be executed by his sword in the past. Shen Qingqiu said, "Only what that man just said was not wrong. The human realm is not a place where you can stay. You should return to the place you belong." He stepped forward. Luo Binghei stepped back, pressing the two of them backwards until they were right before the endless abyss. Looking back, one could see the simmering demonic qi roiling unceasingly within the ravine, the anguished wailing of tens of thousands of spirits, the hundreds and thousands of deformed arms reaching up from the cracks towards the human realm, hungering for fresh blood and flesh. The deeper regions faded into black fog and eerie scarlet light. Shu Ya pointing into the abyss, Shen Qingqiu said, "Will you go down yourself, or must I force you?" He very selfishly wished Luo Binghei would go down by himself. Normally, people who choose to jump down cliffs themselves would always be caught on something. This way he could believe his own lies and give the scene a happy ending. Better this scene being carved into his memory from here on out, to remember night and day that he himself had shoved Luo Binghei down with his own two hands. But Luo Binghei still refused to accept it. He still refused to believe that the Shizun who'd been so kind to him would actually shove him down. He refused to believe that all those years of interaction spanning morning to evening would lead to this kind of conclusion. Even as Shu Ya stabbed into his chest, he still clung onto a very last strand of hope. Shen Qingqiu hadn't meant to stab him. He really hadn't. He was only steeling himself, waving his sword around in order to scare him. As long as Luo Binghei stepped back once more to avoid it, he'd naturally fall in. But Shen Qingqiu had never predicted Luo Binghei would simply silently stand there, taking the blade head on. It's all over. Originally he was kicked down, now there's an extra stab added onto the grudges. Luo Binghei turned his hand over to grip the blade, but he didn't use any strength, and only lightly held it. Which meant if Shen Qingqiu decided to exert force, Shu Ya could continue to stab into him until it pierced straight through his chest. His throat lightly bobbed. He said not a single word. The blade point clearly hadn't pierced his heart, yet Shen Qingqiu felt like he could feel that heart's painful thumps, traveling up the blade and into his arm, spreading through his entire body until it arrived at his own heart. Shen Qingchu suddenly withdrew the sword. Due to his actions, Luo Binghei's body swayed a little, but he very quickly steadied himself. Seeing that Shen Qingchu hadn't dealt the killing blow, his eyes that had originally dimmed faintly shone once more. Like sparks struggling within burnt ashes, the corner of his mouth managed to twitch. Perhaps he was trying to smile. And then Shen Qingchu would use a final strike and extinguish that last trace of light within his eyes. He knew he would never forget Luo Binghei's expression from that moment as he fell. By the time the sect leaders and cultivators arrived, having finished clearing out the demons within Zhudi Gorge's barrier, the spatial rift caused by the endless abyss had long closed. Other than Shang Qinghua, who was playing dead, Shen Qingchu had already stabilized the injuries of everyone who'd passed out, but he hadn't actually paid attention to his own. His robes were splattered with blood, his face expressionless and stark white. He looked quite wretched. Yu Qingwan stepped forward to check his pulse and condition, then frowned and asked Mu Qingfang as the expert to examine him. Liu Qingge sensed they were short one person, and it was the person who'd often flitted around Shen Qingchu, impossible to miss. He asked, "Where's your disciple?" Head lowered, Shen Qingchu didn't answer, and picked up the shattered pieces of a longsword lying on the ground that had broken into many segments. Qingjing Peak's disciples hurried forward. The sharp-eyed Mingfan leading them looked at the sword and stammered, "Shizun, that sword can't be!" Back then, he'd yearned for this Shen Yang sword that was on Wanjian Peak, and spent many years thinking about it. After Luo Binghei had pulled it, his entire body had burned with jealousy, and for many nights he'd cursed while tossing and turning. He definitely wouldn't mistake it. Ning Yingying suddenly gave a loud wail. "Shizun, don't scare me! Is this Aluo Zheng Yang? It can't be, right? It can't be!" Bursts of whispers came from around them. "Zheng Yang? They're talking about Peak Lord Shen's beloved disciple, Luo Binghei? A sword exists with its master. The sword is already broken, so where is he? Could he have..." Someone sighed while saying, "If it really was so, this is truly a great pity. With this course of events, Luo Binghei has already become the Immortal Alliance Conference top ranker. Heaven envies talent. Heaven envies talent." There were those who sighed in pity, those who were stunned, those who were sorrowful, and those who rejoiced in the misfortune of others. Ning Yingying started crying loudly on the spot. Though Mingfan hated Luo Binghei and was always secretly cursing at him to go die, he'd never really wanted him dead. Moreover, thinking about how much Shizun had adored him, and how this stinking brat had died without even leaving a corpse, Shizun must be terribly sad. Gloom and worry clouded Qingjing Peak's entire group. Shanshu's Peak's group was all women. With Qi Qingqi as the head, they were also deeply moved. Liu Qingge wasn't good with words. He patted Shen Qingchu's shoulder and said, "Your disciple's gone, but you can still accept more." Though he knew Liu Qingge was trying to comfort him, Shen Qingchu still wanted to feebly roll his eyes at him. People who didn't kick their favorite disciple, who also doubled as the male lead, down into the endless abyss, are all just talking from the sidelines. Whatever. The ending has already been set. Shen Qingchu slowly said, "Qingjing Peak's disciple Luo Binghei fell to the demons and perished." That's the worst part of this book. It's the part we've been building up to. Ugh, and now we're going to kind of be in part 2, where we deal with what happens when our adorable little student grows up to become an evil demon master. Or is he? It's the worst is behind us. There's going to be more misunderstandings, more drama and stuff coming, but the most sad bit is this bit. Unfortunately, season 1 of the show ends on this bit, so if you ever watched the show, prepare to suffer. Oh, reading that aloud really hurt me a lot. Oh man, my heart. I knew that part was going to be so sad, but oh, that part was rough. Ugh, it's really sad. It's gonna hurt to watch the show. Okay, so if you don't understand, or let me summarize here, the turning point of the novel originally was when the evil teacher Shen Qingchu betrayed his student and shoved him into the endless abyss thinking he'd die. But he survived, became powerful, became a demon lord, came back for revenge, and killed the teacher. Of course, in this version of the book, the teacher is a kind and gentle person that loves his student and didn't want to push him in, but because of the laws of the system, he was forced to. So now he thinks his beloved little student's going to come back and kill him for revenge. Is that what's going to happen? I guess we'll find out when we read more of this next week. Oh man, that's the most we've read in one sitting of this book. But once we started getting towards it, I was like, we got to get this part out of the way. It's gonna hurt. Oh man. Well, thanks for listening. This is going to be all I do today because I want to finish a bunch of things that I've had on the back burner for a while, post some members content, update all those links and everything. I'll post about it when it's done updating. Tomorrow I'm going to stream a game at like 2, probably do a longer game stream since it's been a while since we played something, so that'll be fun. If you like what I do and you want to support it, links are in the description. You can become a member, you can give me a coffee, you can buy my books, all kinds of jazz. Thanks to the members that are here today, like Jeff and Delvin. Thank you guys so much for the support. That is it for now, and I will be back tomorrow with video games, and hopefully I will have some posts for members today. I need to, I moved all of my files from Google Drive to Dropbox, so all the members' content has been inaccessible. Should be fixed by today. Sorry for the delay. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye!